The 1st of September, 1939. After a false accusation that the Poles attacked a German radio station, Nazi Germany launches a retaliatory campaign against Poland, triggering World War II. Poland finds itself fighting a two-front war when it's invaded by the Soviet Union from the east on the 17th of September. Warsaw officially surrenders to the Germans on the 28th of September, and one day later, in accordance with a secret protocol to their non-aggression pact, Germany and the Soviet Union partition Poland. They divide Poland into thirds, the western third annexed to Germany, the eastern third annexed to the Soviet Union, and the middle third turned into a semi-independent administrative unit called the General Government, which is run by German authorities and divided into 4 districts, one of them being the Warsaw District. In this district, in January 1940, the Germans appoint a new commander of the state police, who will commit such unspeakable atrocities against the Poles and Jews that they will appall even his Nazi superiors. His name is Josef Meisinger. Josef Albert Meisinger was born on the 14th of September, 1899, in Munich, then part of the German Empire. He was only 14 years old when on the 28th of July 1914, the First World War began. In 1916, he volunteered to join the army, and in July of the following year, he was sent to the Western Front, where he was seriously injured. The First World War ended on the 11th of November 1918, and for his service Josef Meisinger was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. On the 1st of October 1920, he found a job as an inspector at the Munich Regional Court, and 2 years later on the 1st of October 1922, Meisinger began working at the Munich Police Headquarters. On the 8th and 9th of November 1923, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party led a coalition group in an attempt to overthrow the German government. The plotters hoped to march on Berlin to launch a national revolution, but the insurrection failed miserably. Units of the Munich police force clashed with the Nazi stormtroopers as they marched into the city center. The 2 groups exchanged fire, which resulted in the deaths of 16 Nazi Party members and 4 police officers. This attempted coup d'etat, in which Meisinger took part, became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. Its ringleaders, including Adolf Hitler, were arrested. Hitler was convicted of high treason and sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, he only served 8 months of his sentence. In the wake of the putsch, the federal and Bavarian government banned the Nazi Party, its formations, and its newspaper. But Hitler's public commitment to coming to power legally induced the authorities to lift the ban in 1925. On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany by the German President, Paul von Hindenburg. In March 1933, Meisinger joined the SS, and 2 months later, he joined the Nazi Party. The same year, he joined the Bavarian political police, which was then headed by Heinrich Himmler, and some of his colleagues included Heinrich Müller, Franz Josef Huber, and Reinhard Heydrich. When in April 1934, Heydrich was appointed chief of the secret state police, the Gestapo, he was transferred to Berlin, and he took Meisinger with him. In May 1934, Meisinger reached the rank of SS Untersturmführer, which was the equivalent to second lieutenant, and Heydrich ordered him to do the following tasks: uncovering of opponents of Adolf Hitler within the Nazi Party, prosecution of cases of abortion, prosecution of cases of intimate relations between Jews and non-Jews, and especially prosecution of homosexuals. The Nazis believed that sexual relations between men were a destructive vice that would lead to the ruin of German people. The Nazi Party denounced homosexuality as a deviation from normal behavior that was completely antithetical to its fundamental belief in the need to increase the pure Aryan population and proper family life. The Nazis saw the purpose of sexual relations as reproduction rather than pleasure, and viewed homosexuality as a threat to the superior Aryan race. In 1936, SS leader and chief of the German police, Heinrich Himmler, established the Reich Central Office for the combating of homosexuality and abortion, and from 1936 to 1938, Meisinger oversaw the office. This office was part of the Kripo, which was a criminal police and worked closely with the Gestapo. The notoriously homophobic Himmler saw both homosexuality and abortion as threats to the German birth rate and thus to the fate of the German people. In 1938, Meisinger got involved in the Blomberg Fritsch Affair, the result of which had an impact on Meisinger's future career in the Nazi hierarchy. Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg was Hitler's Minister of Defense and Colonel General Werner von Fritsch the Commander-in-Chief of the army. Because both generals had been hesitant with the war preparations Hitler demanded, Hitler, Albert Göring, and Himmler wanted to find an excuse to get rid of them. Meisinger's investigation revealed that von Blomberg's wife, Erna Grün, had been a prostitute and posed for pornographic photos. Von Blomberg had been a widower since the death of his first wife, Charlotta, in 1932. Grün was a 25-year-old typist and secretary, but Meisinger had a long criminal file on her and her mother, a former prostitute. Hitler ordered Blomberg to annul the marriage to avoid a scandal and to preserve the integrity of the army. Von Blomberg at first refused to end his marriage, but when Göring threatened to make public the pasts of Erna Grün and her mother, he was forced to resign. Göring also wanted to dispose of von Fritsch, as he did not want von Fritsch to become the successor to von Blomberg, and thus his superior. Meisinger was again asked to find some dirt on the unmarried von Fritsch, and he came up with a file that von Fritsch had been engaged in homosexual activity. This file had already been prepared in 1936, and when in the same year Heinrich passed the information on to Hitler, he chose to dismiss the allegations and ordered Heinrich to destroy the file. However, he did not do so. Von Fritsch had never been a womanizer and had preferred to concentrate on his army career, but due to these allegations he was forced to resign on the 4th of February, 1938. It soon became known that the charges were false. Meisinger found a witness who identified von Fritsch as a man who had been engaged in homosexual activities. But later in court, however, it was eventually determined that Werner von Fritsch had been confused with Rittmeister Achim von Fritsch. Von Fritsch was acquitted on the 18th of March, but the damage to his name had been done. High-ranking officials of the Wehrmacht were outraged at von Fritsch's treatment. Werner Best, a deputy of SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, in describing this incident, called Meisinger a primitive man with clumsy methods. For providing fabricated evidence, Meisinger had to face consequences, and as a result of Meisinger and his agency's failure, he and others were replaced, transferred for disciplinary reasons, or dismissed. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The German army was followed by the Einsatzgruppen, which were Nazi mobile death squads sent to Poland to kill the civilians, mostly the Polish intelligentsia, such as teachers, priests, physicians, and other prominent members of Polish society. Josef Meisinger was appointed deputy commander of the Einsatzgruppe IV in Poland, and on the 1st of January 1940, he became the commander of the state police in the Warsaw District. Meisinger proceeded to apply brutal force against Poles, mostly those of Jewish descent. On the 22nd of November 1939, as a reprisal for the murder of a Polish policeman, he ordered the execution of 55 Jewish residents, and on the 20th of December, the execution of 107 Poles, as a reprisal for the murder of 2 Germans. As part of the AB action, which aimed to eliminate the Polish intelligentsia, Meisinger authorized the Palmiry massacre, the mass shooting of 1,700 people in the forest near the village of Palmiry, 23 kilometers northwest of Warsaw. Prior to the massacre, prisoners consisting of community leaders, professors, teachers, priests or Jews were put on trucks and taken to the Campinos forest near Palmiry. Once the trucks arrived in the forest, prisoners were stripped of their luggage and some of them would be blindfolded and their hands tied. Next, they were led to the edge of a pit, a prospective mass grave, where they were shot at with long firearms in such a way that their limp bodies slid into the pit. Those who were still alive were shot in the head with short firearms. In some cases, the SS would burn the wounded alive. Meisinger became so notorious that he was called the Butcher of Warsaw. After the war, Walter Schellenberg, the former head of the Foreign Intelligence Section of the SD, wrote in his memoirs that Meisinger's atrocities in Warsaw had even appalled his superiors. He wrote, "I had collected a huge file which proved him to be so utterly bestial and corrupt as to be practically inhuman." Schellenberg sent information about Meisinger's bestial deeds in Warsaw to the Gestapo headquarters in Berlin. According to Schellenberg, at the end of the investigations, Himmler decided to try Meisinger before a court-martial and shoot him. Meisinger, however, was saved by Heydrich, who sent him to Japan. From the 1st of April 1941 to May 1945, Meisinger acted as Gestapo liaison, connecting leaders and particular agents of the SD at the German embassy in Tokyo. His duties included seeking out enemies of the Third Reich within the German community using various informants. He was also the SD liaison officer to the Japanese Secret Intelligence Service. One of his tasks in Japan was the observation of the secret Soviet agent Richard Zorge, who in May 1941, 1 month after Meisinger's arrival in Japan, reported to Moscow that the German attack on its then ally, the Soviet Union, would commence in the latter part of June. On the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Meisinger, however, instead of investigating Zorge, became his constant drinking companion and one of Zorge's best sources of information. In 1941, Meisinger tried to influence the Japanese to exterminate approximately 23,000 Jews who had escaped from Austria, Germany, Poland, and Russia, and who were living in Japanese-occupied Shanghai. Meisinger suggested to the Japanese as to how they might carry out an efficient Nazi slaughter, proposing they be gassed, be set on ships that were then sunk, or to be isolated on the nearby islands to starve. The Japanese were repulsed by such suggestions, and they did not yield to the pressure from Meisinger. Meisinger thus decided to take advantage of their fear of espionage. In the fall of 1942, he was instructed by Berlin to report to the Japanese authorities the names of all anti-Nazis among the Germans. Meisinger explained that these anti-Nazis were also anti-Japanese. The list contained, among other things, the names of all Jews with German passports in Japan. It thus became clear to the Japanese that those who had fled to Shanghai since the November pogroms of 1938, in particular, represented the highest potential danger. The proclamation of a ghetto was thus a logical consequence of Meisinger's interventions. The ghetto covered an area of approximately 1 square mile. The ghetto was strictly isolated by Japanese soldiers, and Jews could only leave with special permission. Limited movement and wartime deprivations made life difficult in the Shanghai Ghetto, though they did not suffer the daily terrors endured by the ghettoized Jews in Europe. The Japanese treatment of Jews in Shanghai was comparatively benign. However, some 2,000 of them died in the Shanghai Ghetto during the wartime period. On the 6th of August 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima, and 3 days later, on the 9th of August 1945, a second atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. On the 15th of August 1945, Japanese Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender to the Allied powers, effectively bringing an end to World War II. The surrender was formally signed on the 2nd of September 1945 aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, marking the official end of World War II. On the 6th of September 1945, Meisinger surrendered to 2 US war correspondents at the Fujiya Hotel in the town of Hakone, 80 kilometers south of Tokyo. The reporters drove him to the Yokohama headquarters of the Counterintelligence Corps, where Meisinger turned himself in. He was held at the Yokohama prison, where he underwent intensive questioning. In 1946, he was extradited to Poland to face justice for the crimes he had committed during the war. The trial began on the 17th of December 1946, and Meisinger's co-defendants were 3 other members of the Nazi authorities of occupied Warsaw: Ludwig Fischer, the governor of the Warsaw District, Ludwig Leist, the mayor of the city of Warsaw, and Max Daumer, acting commander of the Order Police in Warsaw, responsible for the massacre of Polish civilians in Wawer, which took place on the 27th of December 1939. During this massacre, 107 of 114 people sentenced to death were killed. The rest managed to survive by simulating their own death. On the 3rd of March 1947, the Polish Supreme National Tribunal found Josef Meisinger guilty and sentenced him to death by hanging. Meisinger was 47 years old when he was hanged in Warsaw's Mokotów prison on the 7th of March 1947. After the war, the previously mentioned Walter Schellenberg, the former head of the Foreign Intelligence Section of the SD, wrote about Meisinger the following. He was a frightening individual, a large, coarse-faced man with a bald head and an incredibly ugly face. He was one of the most evil creatures among Heinrich's bunch of thugs, and he carried out the vilest of his orders. There were no tears shed for Josef Meisinger. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.